Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Wrench Tales. I got a treat for you today. I got my good buddy Chad Austin here from Austin Automotive out in Canyon City, Colorado, but most of you probably know him better as the Practical Mechanic from YouTube. Chad, a million thanks for joining me today, buddy. This is a real treat. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, Brandon.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. Chad has this really interesting case study. And what I love about this fascinates me because I am not a diesel tech by trade. Do I work on them? Reluctantly. I choose not to if I had the choice. And I'm not the fastest, most swift diagnostician out there when it comes to diesel. So when I hear somebody struggling with one, I want to get a bowl of popcorn and watch because I'm trying to learn as well. So thanks for bringing this to us. I appreciate that, Chad. Without further ado, I want to share this vehicle, this problem, this case that Chad has with us. So I cleverly named this a break in the cycle, and they'll understand. But if you could, Chad, please walk us through this vehicle from the day you faced it. Would you mind?
Yeah, no problem. This was a 2004 Chevy 2500 HD with the LB7 Duramax. Um, Customer has owned the vehicle since almost new, very low miles when he purchased it. He had done a couple sets of injectors over the years. He came to us because it was smoking gray smoke and he had a rough idle. So that's the customer complaint is rough idle and gray smoke. And it's because he's been down this road before, he was kind of prepared for injectors. So those of you
That
that don't
makes
work
sense.
on these, we often, hook up the scan tool and we look at the injector balance rates. And that's kind of like the fuel trim per injector, it balances the engine out. If there's an injector flowing a little bit less, the computer will bump it up a little bit so everything's smooth. When
Love
those
that.
go out of whack, you can see that on the scan tool. So we
It's
sold
almost like a
inject.
home run, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We sold injectors on this, and it was all good. About 3 months later, the customer came back and it had a misfire. So this is our first time comeback. Since we
So it
labeled it that,
left.
you know that there's going to be more. It came back with a dead miss. Now, these injectors did come from Jasper. We normally have good luck with their injectors. Number six had a high balance rate, and it was the only one. All the other ones looked good, but number six. So we did a warranty injector on number six.
Mhm.
Now,
Now, real
these,
quick, I just
yeah,
want to
go.
ask a question. I'm sorry. For those of us that are not well versed in diesel, a high balance rate, would you equate that to very similar to like an increase in fuel trim on a gasoline engine?
Correct. But on this diesel, it does it per cylinder. So you can actually look at the fuel trim per cylinder, but it only shows up at idle. So you can't
Ah,
monitor
okay.
that under load.
Very good. What's
So
the
if it's
purpose of that?
if it's a higher number, then it's adding more fuel to that cylinder to try and speed it up to match the other cylinders.
Great, like a stronger combustion event.
Yeah,
Perfect. I'm
absolutely.
with you. Awesome. Thank you.
So we did one injector. These
Mhm.
early engines, you have to take all the fuel lines off. You have to pull the upper and lower valve cover off. You have to take the combined fuel return line off. So it's a labor intensive job. You're probably
Mm.
looking book time of 4 hours per bank. So it's
Holy.
not something you really want to jump into. And normally when we're selling a job, we won't do just one injector. But since it's warranty, we'll do the one injector.
I get that.
We did that one injector and that misfire under load went away. Or I guess it was a constant miss on that event. Um, we thought we were all good to go
Oh no.
until about 3 months later.
Oh no. Again?
Again, but this time we didn't have the miss. It came in with just a complaint of an intermittent rough idle. We
Okay.
don't have the smoke complaint, and we don't have the misfire under load complaint like before. So not exactly the same symptoms, but the same system that we already touched.
So let me guess, you walk up to the customer and you go, but it's not my fault, right?
Luckily, I don't have to talk to the customer as often as my service advisors, but so I don't have to do all the explaining.
So where do you go from here? I mean, this is getting it. I don't want to say frustrating because in my mind, like as a tech, yeah, it's a comeback, but it's not doing the same thing. So I feel like I didn't screw up.
Yeah,
That makes
it's one of those things where you really start questioning, are the parts bad? Is the
hmm
workmanship bad? Did we check for contamination in the fuel? is the guy getting, bad fuel causing some of these issues, especially because it was intermittent. It wasn't all the time. Sometimes sitting at a stop sign, he said that the mirrors would shake, and other times it was fine. So, it's one of those things that it's an intermittent issue, which sounds like it could be, a sticky injector, maybe, debris that's in the system.
I get that. I get that. And of the few diesels I've worked on, I've been down this road before with contamination from maybe a pump gone bad and metal making its way upstream to the downstream, I should say, to the injectors and collected. So I've seen that. I'm with you. So this rough idle, what did you notice from the data you've gathered?
So it was kind of strange. The we had a couple of cylinders that were a little bit high. We had a couple cylinders that were a little bit low. Nothing that normally stands out as, yeah, this truck's going to run rough. Normally if you're plus or minus 4, it's still a good injector. You don't have to worry about it. Once you get above 4 on the balance rates is when you start having an injector that is going to cause something you can feel. It's going to cause some smoke, and that's when need to address it. But
Got it.
this one wasn't, sometimes it was a little bit above 4, sometimes it wasn't. But it was kind of intermittent as well. So
That's
we did our normal checks. We checked our fuel filters. We checked our fuel system vacuum, make sure that wasn't restricted. We did check for contamination in the fuel and didn't see anything.
so vacuum fuel system vacuum. You mean how it's pulling from the tank, right? It should
Yes, on
pull
the
like through a straw.
yeah, these ones don't have a pump in the tank to, lift the fuel to the engine. They actually have a suction pump mounted on the back of the injection pump. So it has to
Gotcha.
draw it like a straw, like you said, all the way from the tank. So if there's any restriction in the filter or any restriction in the lines or in the tank, then there's a test port on the engine. You can hook up a gauge and you can monitor for that.
So if the vacuum is too much, you would assume there's a restriction, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, I'm with you. Thank you. So your misfires are counting up, but it runs great otherwise, right? Like other than I.
Yeah. You take out and go drive it. The customer pulls a trailer every once in a while. It would run fine. He didn't have any complaints about power. It was just that intermittent rough idle that, he was a little concerned about or wanted addressed because he had spent quite a bit of money on injectors to fix it the first time, which technically, was a smoke issue as well as the
Mhm.
rough idle.
Gotcha. And I'm noticing something here with this picture we've got attached to this slide. Um, these misfires, I see where they're counting up. Um, I shouldn't say misfires, but like balance rates. But I'm noticing a little bit of a pattern here. I'm assuming you see that same pattern, right?
Yes, and the pattern, it would change sometimes, but for the most part, it was pretty consistent. And what we had is we had companion cylinders that were oftentimes, positive, and then we had other companion cylinders that were oftentimes negative, which was kind of weird because, we wouldn't expect to have, random cylinders throughout this engine, both running lean or both running rich per se.
You know what? And I just want to, if that doesn't ring a bell for some of you that are watching this and listening to what Chad's sharing with us, when I hear, let me back up through my years of doing drivability, you grow to learn quickly that a crankshaft turns twice in every engine cycle, and half of the engine, let's say, completes a combustion event in one crankshaft rotation, and then in the other crankshaft rotation, the second half of the cycle, the other half of the engine completes a combustion event. And the fact that they're companion cylinders tells me the crankshaft is in the same spot two different times when this problem seems to be occurring. That's kind of the information I'm ascertaining from what you're telling me.
Yeah, and that's kind of the same thought we had, and that's when we started looking into stuff. But this one was it's kind of a butt kicker. I exhausted all the resources on this one. I reached out for help, the Facebook communities, and I couldn't really get anyone that had a solution for me. I was looking for that silver bullet that never came.
Yeah, I bet, like I said, of the few diesels I've worked on, and I can count on one hand how many diesel engine, you know, drivability problems I had to handle. And the one I was really, really deep into, and I called one of my Favorite people as far as diesel comes, because that fella's always bailing me out. I don't want to drop his name here because I don't want to embarrass him. But he told me the problem I thought I found after I tore the engine apart. He said it's definitely not that. I'm like, oh no. And it turned out the data was right. I was right. I was correct, but I reached for that silver bullet and it wasn't it. So I lucked out. So, Chad, you say here there's a potential that the correction factor might be actually creating the issue, meaning that the ECM is trying to fix this problem, but we think it's actually might be creating the problem.
Yeah, so what I noticed is if I just barely touched the accelerator, the balance rates would disable and the roughness would go away. So
Whoa.
it was kind of confusing on on why that was happening. Just even 1% TPS.
I love that. So in essence, you basically it's almost like a push button on a scan tool turning off. You didn't really change the RPM, but
Correct.
but you got rid of the corrective factor. So I love it. You're like process of elimination here.
And the balance rates are there to smooth our idle. That's the only time they're active, and that's their job is to make it run smooth at idle so we don't feel that vibration. Because, injectors wide open, a lot of times they flow pretty much the same, but at idle they may have some slight deviations. And on a diesel, you don't have a throttle body to control your idle. It's wide open air all the time. So they use the
Hmm.
injection pulse width to control the speed of the engine. And if each cylinder is not flowing the exact same amount, then they're going to bump it up and down to try and smooth it out the best they can.
And that's important to know for us gas guys that don't work on diesels often. Just realizing, I mean, I already took away just looking at injector rates as a clue. I mean, that's brilliant. That could save a lot of time.
And some of the newer ones have a throttle body, but they don't use it for idle control at all. That's normally just for the emission system. So if you do see one
Understood.
with a throttle body, don't get confused that it's controlling the idle.
Makes sense. Thank you. Yes, I have seen that and been confused in the past before I knew why it was there, but a great point to bring up. So I guess the question becomes, are these balance rates even necessary? And if not, why is the ECM implementing them? So you took this a step further. Like it's one thing to sit in the driver's seat and go, "Yep, I feel something," and then tell somebody else that you feel a problem with your ass in the seat. Pardon the expression. But where do we go from there? Like I don't want to hang my hat on that. I want something that shows me what my problem is. You implemented something pretty nifty here. A lot of us by now have heard of noise, vibration, and harshness, and we refer to NVH testing as a way to put something visual, an indicator on not only vibration intensity, like how strong this vibration is, but also what type of vibration. So in a vehicle wide, I mean a tire vibration versus an axle vibration versus a U joint vibration versus a misfire vibration. Using something that can detect this vibration like we feel in the seat of our pants and put it on a graph for us to view visibly, we can see things occur. So Chad, I'll be the first to tell you, I don't know much about this at all. I know what it can do for us, but I'm no analyst when it comes to vibration analysis. Can you walk us through what you do know and what this
Yeah.
shows you?
So I've attended probably 5 or 6 different classes on NVH, but I don't own an NVH kit. So,
Okay.
it's one of those things if you don't learn it and then take it back to the shop and put it into practice, it kind of fades away. So I know enough to know about it, but not to be an expert. And I don't
Fair
even own
enough.
a kit. I actually had a friend drive halfway across the country to try and help me diagnose this truck, and one of the tools he brought with him was an NVH kit. So
Beautiful.
after we were stumped for a while, we threw the NVH on there just so we could confirm that what we were feeling was real. And
I get it. I get that. And would you mind, as simply as possible, can you explain what this graph is here on the screen and what it's telling you?
so that graph is the different frequencies that the NVH kit can pick up. So it's picking up, vibrations from that engine, vibrations from the injectors firing, all of it. But there's a certain amount of sequence to all of it. An engine, every time it rotates around, it's going to have a vibration due to the mechanical components of the engine. Every time a
Sure.
cylinder fires, that happens 4 times every time that engine runs around. That's going to be another set of vibrations. And the NVH kit, especially this Pico one, it really does a lot of the math for you. You
Hmm.
can either enter in your RPM manually, or you can hook it up to a diagnostic interface and it can pick it up off the data link connector.
So through basic math and engine configuration, we can figure out how many, bang, 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 bang should be occurring in every engine cycle by way of engine speed, and then figure out if there's anything else that shouldn't be there
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
going to show. So this is it's reading frequency or how fast those vibrations occur from left to right. And I think these are milligrams. So this would be intensity, meaning a taller peak would be a stronger vibration. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. And that one that you were just hovering over, that's our fourth order vibration. And that's really high because this is a V8 engine. So we get 4 cylinders on combustion cycle or on power stroke, each rotation of the engine. So we will have an elevated E4. So that fourth order vibration that being elevated is normal.
So we've got fourth order, and I see first order and half order. What is a first order vibration? What does that mean?
So if the first order vibration is something that happens every rotation of the engine. So that could be an engine balance issue, um,
Oh,
a harmonic dampener, a torque converter, or even a bent crankshaft could cause that.
so
And then we have a half order as well that displays on the screen. And that's something that happens every 2 rotations of the engine, so every cycle of the engine. And that's
oh,
something
I
that
get it.
would be like an engine misfire.
Right, because a single cylinder misfire occurs every two rotations of the crankshaft. So it would be a half a cycle. Right, half order. That makes sense. So one rotation of the crankshaft is what a one or a first order vibration is, right?
Yes.
So what would an E4 or a fourth order vibration mean?
So E4 is
Does that
normal.
mean
So
four
a high
times?
E4, that's normal. That's just our firing events. So we have 4 injectors firing every rotation of the our 4 cylinders on combustion, every
Because it could
rotation.
be
So
a
the engine is going to speed up, and when it speeds up, it's going to shake a little bit.
gotcha. That's because this is a V8, right?
Yes. Yep.
Now
V8
it makes
diesel.
perfect sense. Okay, so back to this graph, we are showing an E. Let me, you know what? Let me zoom in on this because I don't know if this is easy to see from home. But our half order vibration, this is the amount of intensity. I guess is this milligrams? If you had a weight swing in something, that's what it
I
would
guess
be.
so. Yeah.
And but our fourth order is really high. So fourth order, half an engine cycle, that's basically four cylinders of the eight, isn't it?
Correct.
Whoa. So our vibration is showing up as basically like four cylinders misfiring. Wouldn't that
It,
also cause an E4?
it probably could. But then if that was 4 cylinders misfiring, depending on where they were at, it may show up as a second order or somewhere else because it would be happening on half of the engine.
Oh
So it's
yeah,
not
good point.
happening 4 times per rotation. It would happen 2 times per rotation.
Now I get it. Okay.
And this picture here is actually when we have the balance rates disabled. What I found is if I used RPM control with the scan tool, once I
Mhm.
went above 1,000 RPM, it would disable balance rates for me. So I didn't have to try and hold the gas pedal still. I could just bring it to
Got
1,000
it.
RPM, balance rates go away, and our engine vibration also seemed to go away. So we wanted to verify that with the Pico, with the NVH
Gotcha.
kit.
So wait, did you feel a vibration through the seat of your pants and then that vibration then went away? Or you didn't feel anything? I'm
Yeah,
curious.
you could definitely feel it if you're sitting in the truck. You could feel it. You could see the side mirrors shaking a little bit, and then as soon
Hmm.
as you touch the gas pedal, or as soon as you would raise the RPM with the scan tool above 1,000 RPM, that vibration would go away. You'd feel it smooth out.
Got it. So this, what we're seeing here, this fourth order vibration is with the rates disabled. What happens when you re-enabled? In other words, when it was at idle and,
So when
and
we
doing
when
its
we
thing.
yeah, when we drop it down with the scan tool or even just at idle where the rates are active, our NVH chart isn't so pretty. It's a little messier.
Let me
Fourth
zoom
order
in again.
still high,
Yeah, there's their fourth order. I see that. Okay.
but you notice now, our half order, which would be a
Quite good.
single cylinder misfire, it's almost non-existent. It's at the bottom of the chart. So when our
Beautiful.
balance rates are active, we don't have a misfire, but yet we feel a vibration. And we can see
Ah,
that first order is very, very high. We're not
okay.
quite to the level of our fourth order, our firing
Hmm.
events, but we're still very, very elevated compared to what we were when the balance rates were disabled.
So we're basically seeing a problem. If we turn off, if we turn off the balance rates, we've got a fault basically every rotation of the crankshaft. So if it was a true misfire, like a single cylinder misfire, we wouldn't have it every rotation of the crankshaft. We'd have it every other rotation of the crankshaft, right?
Correct.
So this is
Yep.
awesome.
And if we had
All
that
right.
single
So
cylinder misfire, that half order would be elevated.
yeah, and it's not. So you took a bunch of potential problems and just took them right off the table. We're not chasing a single injector. That's no good. So where did you go from here? Where did this information take you?
Uh, down a few rabbit holes. Um,
It happens, my friend. That's why we're
so
talking about it.
even though we looked at the NVH and we're like, we don't see a physical mechanical vibration source when our balance rates aren't active. In my head, I'm like, I still need to check that. I
Yeah,
don't, I'm
I
not
get it.
familiar enough with NVH to be comfortable making that call.
Totally get that. I
So,
call that learning with the training wheels on.
yeah,
You're gathering the info, but you're not leaning on it.
correct. And
Love that.
so if we're dealing with a physical vibration source on this engine or a mechanical vibration source that's happening in that the order range that we had with the chart, it's going to be a balancer, a torque converter, potentially a bent crankshaft. Very, very slim chance that we have, two bent rods or something on companion cylinders.
Right.
I don't think
I
that's going
get
to
it.
happen.
I love this. This is data driven decision making. You are not pulling this out of your rear end. You're making logical decisions based upon what you know from the data you've gathered. This is like science at its best. I love it.
So we did pull the balancer off. We
Okay.
verified that it had not slipped compared to
Okay.
a known good. We verified that the dowel pin in the crankshaft that aligns the balancer that hadn't sheared off, because that's a pretty common occurrence as well. You have to
Ah,
pull this
okay.
dampener off to do the water pump.
Gotcha.
It's has a very, very high torque spec, so people just get their little impact in there and they give it a few taps and they call it good instead of locking the flywheel and actually torquing it.
Hmm.
So
I
if
get
that
that.
happens, if that bolt comes loose, the balancer will bounce around. And instead of having like a quarter-inch keyway in the crankshaft, it has like a quarter-inch dowel pin that goes in, from the side of the crank. So it's a real small area that is holding that balancer.
Got it. Capable of damage quite easy, right? If it's
Yeah.
not taken care of.
So with no
Understood.
problem on the balancer, we threw that back on. We also ran it with the belt off, no change. So I'm
Okay.
like, well, this thing did have a delay going into gear one time when I started it up. Do we have a torque converter issue? Is there a piece of friction
Possibility.
material that's catching every time the engine rotates around? So I unbolted the torque converter and I ran the engine. I had to put the starter back in, ran
Hmm.
the engine with no transmission attached, and it didn't run good at all. Uh,
Yeah. Nothing
since
to.
there was no load on the engine, it couldn't find a stable idle. So when I bolted the converter back up, I made sure that I bolted it up in a different orientation than it was originally.
Got it.
Luckily, it's a symmetrical bolt pattern, so I could just move it one bolt hole, tighten it up. If my
Yeah.
problem
Make a
would have moved
change.
to a different cylinder, then I would have known that, hey, we have an issue with this torque converter.
Totally logical.
So it was
I
really
love
just
that.
one more thing to cross off the list of possibilities.
So it's not the engine. It's not the accessories. It's not the transmission. So you've isolated everything mechanically. But the point is, for some reason, this ECU thinks there's an imbalance. Do you agree with that? I mean,
Yep.
that's kind of from the story you're telling me.
And I even I took an ECM out of a known good truck, another truck we had there for injectors, and I programmed it for this truck, did the security learn because I wanted to verify that I didn't have a logic problem, that I didn't have
Yeah,
a bad learned value in this ECM that was throwing it off. I even swapped the FICM just to cover myself. You know, it was
I
only
get it.
time, you know,
Yeah,
and
I mean, we can't test for these things. We can only eliminate other stuff.
and there's a lack of good information, you know, for some of this diagnostics because we don't have misfire data, actual misfire data. We just have our balance rates. There's two modules in charge of it. We have our ECM that's looking at all our inputs and outputs, and it sends signals over to the fuel injection control module that runs our injectors. So at this point, I had about given up, and I even sent the truck off for a second opinion at a diesel specialty shop. Um, Paid them more than I should have for them to tell me that it needs injectors and a fast fuel pump put on the frame rail, which I knew it
Wait
didn't
a
need.
minute. Did you tell them the test you already did?
I gave them a two-page document on everything that I had done with my results
Oh my
because
goodness
I
gracious.
almost wanted to send it to them blind. And I'm like, no, I've got 40 plus hours of diag time in this thing. I don't want to pay for
Oh,
that a second time. So I gave them
they
a heads up.
they didn't even bother looking at
It,
the information of what you did. Man, they threw away some great stuff. What a waste of time.
yeah, yeah,
So you put in all the injectors like and change the fuel map and everything, right?
yes, yeah, I gave it a stage 9 tune and now it can pop wheelies and blow black smoke. But it still idles
Kidding, of
rough.
course. Kidding, of course, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Where'd you go from here? You got it back, obviously, dragging your tail between your legs.
So I we told the customer that, you know, we're kind of coming up empty here. You're gonna have to drive it until it gets worse, and then we might be able to find it. He wasn't too concerned because it just had the rough idle. He drove it almost 15,000 miles, and it had been about a year when
Whoa.
the problem got worse.
Okay.
So he brought the truck back in with a misfire when cold under acceleration.
Okay.
And I told myself I can fix the misfire.
Oh yeah.
And I'm checking out on the rough idle for now.
Yeah.
But
Hopefully they're related, right?
yeah, but I suspected that we had an injector harness, you know, chafing issue, which is common, uh,
Sure.
possibly a sticky injector since it only seemed to do it when it was cold. So I'm like,
Right.
I can figure that out. So the first thing I did was look at the balance rates. They were worse than they were previously. I don't think we have it in here, but the one cylinder, cylinder four, it was all the way up to a 10 on the balance rates.
Wow. You
So in
said
my head,
four is like your
I'm thinking that injector four is probably my cause. So, you know, I wanted to make sure, especially with that misfire, I'm like, I should be able to catch that misfire. There should be something in the injector voltage or the injector current that's going to show this misfire.
yeah.
Since I
What do we
don't
got
have
here?
actual misfire data in the scan tool, you know, we have to rely on other equipment to tell us where that misfire is at.
Got it.
So
Okay.
if I go ahead,
No, 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 no. Go ahead. I'm with you. I was saying.
if we have, you know, our crank sensor signal, then we can kind of see the engine accelerating, decelerating, using a math channel with Pico. So I have a capture with the crank sensor. I also needed an injector sync, so I knew where we were at.
Okay.
Because we got four channels, I may as well use them. I got
Gotcha.
injector current, and I've got, I think, cylinder one and cylinder four injectors because those were the
So
ones with the highest balance rates.
okay. So red and blue is cylinder one and number four injector.
Correct.
Green would be the current for
Yep.
both of these injectors together, right? Because they're kind of paired.
And actually, I think that amp clamp was around both injector power supply branches. So that should be all
Gotcha.
of our injectors.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
And then we
Very
have our
good.
crank sensor in yellow.
So one rotation of the crankshaft is should be half of the injectors,
Yep.
and then the other half, something's missing here, huh?
Yeah, and actually looking at our notes here, I have it labeled, luckily. I don't normally label it, but injector for current group one. So this is just half the injectors. That's why if we look at our missing teeth, we only see two injectors fire between each group of missing teeth there. So
Okay, that makes
I'm,
sense.
I'm only on half the injectors.
So right off the bat, we're going to be missing half because you're not even measuring them,
Yeah.
right? So basically, what you're saying here is it's normal to see four.
Yes, if I had two amp clamps on there, one around each injector group, we would see four injector firing per rotation.
So between here and here, there should be four of these paired peaks, and you're only seeing two.
Yes.
And then here,
Yep.
they're gone, half the
I
engine.
I found out that when it's cold, if I would power brake the truck lightly, about 1200 RPM, and held it there for about 15 seconds, I would get a hard misfire. Now I could get this to happen on the road more often, but road test with the scope isn't always the best time to be trying to find stuff. So if I can duplicate it in the bay, I prefer to do that.
I totally get that. I totally get that. So, from what you're telling me, it's clear the PC, sorry, I keep saying the PCM, the ECU, the engine control module, or the FICM, right? The device that drives the injectors for some reason is not driving them.
Correct. And
And you swapped out the computers already.
swapped out the computer, swapped out the FICM, because FICMs are, they're at the age now where they're starting to fail. The capacitors are failing, so we wanted to make sure that. But here's the thing with this capture, brand is I didn't have a single cylinder misfire.
Yeah,
I'm missing a lot of injectors,
like four.
and it may, because I was only looking at one side, we may actually be missing more than that, but we definitely are missing more than one injector firing.
This is good to know.
So
This
in my head, I'm thinking, okay, this is not a single injector with an issue. I don't see any weird anomalies in my voltage waveform, so I'm not losing, the injector driver itself. I'm
I agree
losing
with that.
command for the injectors.
I agree with that. And where does that command come from? Like, why would an ECU try to turn on an injector now? Where does it get that information?
If a diesel, when you decelerate, when you're coasting, it'll shut the injectors off completely, just like a gasoline car. Um,
Okay.
so I'm like, okay, is it something like that? Probably not, because my all my inputs for the TPS were good, and I'm not decelerating, while going down the road. So I quickly crossed that off the list. I'm like, I really got to look at the cam and crank sensor signals, or the inputs, because if we were to lose sync, then potentially the ECM would say, hey, wait a second, what just happened? And then another rotation of the engine goes by and say, oh, okay, we're good. And then it starts firing the injectors again.
I love the way you think, my friend.
But we can see the
So,
crank sensor signal looked pretty good,
yeah,
until we start
right
to
here.
zoom in on it. Yeah, I mean, just from a distance, it didn't drop out noticeably. So I started
Right.
zooming in right after that misfire, looking for a dropout.
So, what we see here, you've now zoomed in on. So, this is a single, these are single pulses.
Yep. And that where it says 996 on the right hand side, that's the beginning of that missing tooth. So I've got a few pulses before it. We can see the injector current, that squiggly line. So number four injector is still firing at this point. And then every
Okay.
this, we have multiple injectors that don't fire. So this is where I focused in. What happened here to cause my issue down the road?
Got it. So, what are you seeing? This catches your eye, right?
That caught my eye. That one pulse looked wider than the other pulses, and it took me a while to notice it. I was just kind of sifting through the screens, and I had to do some measurement because because it looked to my eye like it was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So I ran a couple of quick measurements, just time based, and noticed that it was quite a bit different.
And if you're at home not catching what Chad's throwing out here to us, this distance here, although this isn't really a fair, maybe If I had this waveform live and we zoomed out just a little bit more, we could see multiple events, but they're all about this wide. But look at this one. It's significantly wider, meaning different. And the ECU is that's what it's looking at. It's looking at to establish that cadence for injector pulses. And if that cadence changes by way of the signal, what could we expect an ECU to do? So where did you go from here? You see this. What did your mind tell you?
Well, I'm thinking, okay, well, do I have a damaged tooth, a damaged tone wheel? And that's why this injector number four, is elevated. Because if it sees a longer tooth, that means that the crank was going slower. As long as the tooth isn't damaged or anything like that. The crank was going slower at this one time. The
Mm-hmm.
computer's like, hey, we need to speed it up. We need more fuel.
I get that. And you know what? Taking that a step further, yeah, if I had a damaged tooth, I agree with that. Wouldn't a damaged tooth show up reliably every rotation
And it
if it
would.
was
And so
if it
I
was
measured
physically there?
several rotations, even when I didn't have the miss or
Mm-hmm.
or the yeah, I guess the miss whenever the injectors didn't fire. But it seemed like the other teeth were always pretty consistent. But this one tooth here, it changed in length, each rotation. It wasn't the same length every time. If it was the same length every time, I would be a little more convinced that we had a damaged tooth, but seeing is believing, and sometimes you just got to look at it.
You had a reason to, though, at least.
Yeah.
So what'd you do?
I pulled the crank sensor out. It's in the side of the timing cover. I could access it through the inner fender, and I stuck a screwdriver in there and uh, was able to wiggle it.
My guess is that's not supposed to do that.
No, it is not. And that's one of the reasons I pulled the balancer off is because I wanted to make sure the tone wheel wasn't, moving around. But it's not accessible from the balancer side. We verified the balancer was torqued down. So I'm like, okay, the tone wheel's going to be sandwiched in there. It's not going to be moving. Um, so I had kind of in my head, I guess, told myself that it wasn't going to be the issue, but I figured I better pull that crank sensor out and test it.
I get that for sure. And you know what? This is again. I'll say it again. It's the sign. You're following the data to make these decisions. You're not just throwing in a set of injectors and a stage 9 fuel map. You're sorry. I had to throw that back in there again. You're actually going off data. I'm stuck on that. I'm wondering what if you invested the money and all that work? What would there be response to you when it didn't fix the problem? Oh, it
You know,
needed that anyway, right?
being the shop that we are, if I threw another set of injectors in it, it didn't fix it, I would be eating that repair.
Oh,
And
so
it's happened before, and it'll happen again, where
hey,
we
we all
make the
make
wrong
mistakes.
call and we make it right.
It's not that you guessed, you misinterpreted the data. That's
Yeah.
all that happens. But not this data. This is clear as crystal.
No, it didn't come to me quickly for sure, but we got there in the end.
And that's really what matters. So justification, I mean, clear as crystal, something happened. Broken, loose, whatever. These are fastened on, I'm assuming with screws.
Yep, there are three little screws with a 5 millimeter Allen head
Okay,
that hold this to the back of the oil pump drive.
got it.
So
Did they just work themselves loose or was somebody in there?
I think they just work themselves loose. The inherent vibration of a diesel engine, especially, if you have an injector that's bad, it's going to vibrate worse. So,
Sure.
multiple sets of injectors in the past for smoke issues and rough
Oscillation.
idle issues could have caused these to back out.
Mm-hmm.
And two of the screws were gone.
Oh,
They're probably in the oil pan somewhere. I
sure.
stuck a magnet in there and couldn't grab onto them, but
Yeah.
one of the screws was still holding on. And what I think happened is I think, a year ago or year and a half ago when we did the second, injector, I guess we did the full set. We did one that was misfiring, and then 3 months later we developed a rough idle that was intermittent and we couldn't fix it. I think that the other two screws were still there at the time. They were
Mm-hmm.
just loose.
Got it.
And that's why it was an intermittent issue. And telling the customer, I can't find it right now. You're gonna have to drive it till it gets worse. It got worse. The screws fell out, and now it was detectable enough to find the issue.
I if you don't mind, Chad, I want to jump in here. I felt that pain, that pressure as a technician in shop to solve a problem that was, when I say seemingly unsolvable, I don't mean like I was ready to throw in the towel, meaning I'm acknowledging there's a problem. I felt it. I can't replicate it enough to capture data to make a decision. So as soon as it starts failing more frequently and I have enough time to capture data to make a decision, I will do so. And I admire you for doing that because I think it would not be the right thing to do to say, this feels like injectors, or this feels like a bad FICM, or this feels like a bad ECM, or it feels like a bad harness, and then put all that stuff in because you just don't want to let the car go. I think you did the right thing, my friend. I really do.
And even, those 40, 50 hours of diagnostic that I had in it, the customer's obviously not billed for that.
Sure.
Some of that's just for me personally because I want to find out what was wrong. It's the vehicle that kicked my butt. I want to kick it back.
I love that. And that 40, 50 hours, that's a huge pill to swallow. But my friend, how much did you learn in that 40, 50 hours about how to leverage the tools, NVH, how to drive the vehicle, tipping in the throttle to eliminate injector balance compensation, um, looking at a waveform and seeing it elongate or stretch out to indicate a change in time. Like these are so many things you learn that are rarely taught in a classroom atmosphere because they're not even thought about to be subject material to teach. It's one of those things you learn from getting bit, right?
Exactly. And it's stuff that's not even in the service information.
Oh yeah, we can forget that. Most of the stuff you and I and a lot of us that watch this channel do, you will never read about in a book because it's just not there. And that's what makes diagnostics, drivability in particular, challenging is not having the information when you need it. So I I do want to reflect on the fact that in ECU is not smart. I say it all the time. It just does what it's programmed to do. So if we deliver a crankshaft position sensor signal like this in a pattern like this that commands, or I should say, requests the injectors to be fired, and we change that request, it's only natural to understand that the ECM is going to fire that injector at the wrong time or not fire it at all. And I love how the information got you there. And I've kept you for such a long time. But if you wouldn't mind walking us through your steps, just real quick, bang, 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 what you and I covered in the last hour, Chad, I'd really appreciate that because I want people to see that there's your process is what you followed. There's a process involved, and it wasn't guesswork and it wasn't wizardry. It was science.
And I'm not a scope first kind of guy. I rely heavily on scan tool information. So that's always my first grab. Scan tool information confirmed the first visit that we needed injectors. Smoke out the tailpipe was the second confirmation. New injectors. Fix that issue until it developed a miss. High balance rates on cylinder number 6, a constant miss, verifying, we don't have a connection issue. New injector fixed that misfire. Vehicle returns with a rough idle, and we can't pin it down to one injector. We find out that we have companions that are acting up. It's not, bad enough that we can make a call at this point. We discover that, tipping in the accelerator disables our balance rates. We checked it with the NVH kit to show that we don't have a engine mechanical issue, which we still verified later, with pulling parts off. Um, and then, once we had enough information to duplicate another problem, the misfire later on, the bucking, we were able to identify the input that was causing that issue.
I love that. I love it. And justified the reason to take it all apart. You didn't take it apart hoping to find a problem. You took it apart to point to the problem and fix it. It's beautiful. And I'm always, you guys will notice those that frequent this channel and this series in particular is most of our summary slides and very similarly, and it's because the process of all these successful diagnosticians, uh, in this case, world famous diagnostician Chad Austin, we all follow very similar processes. True, we don't do everything the same, but the way we get there is a little bit different, but the process is the same. And it's using the easy tests to carry us through to the more what tests we really want to focus on that will more closely point to the problem and be less vague. And when it comes time to taking things apart, especially a big Duramax diesel engine like this, I mean, that's some serious labor time. And I cringe at that normally. I don't want to do that stuff at all. But to do it and hope to find a problem, buddy, you got to have a set of brass ones to want to do that because that's not me. I'm not going to gamble with my labor time, not that kind of labor time. But having that information in front of you that you can follow and go, my problem's over there. I can prove it. There it is, right there on paper, or in this case, on your PC screen. Um, it led you to the test you wanted to perform. The test pointed to what you needed to take apart, and when you took it apart and found the problem, it summed everything up. Um, what I do want to focus on just for a moment is the work being performed. Um, the big takeaway from that capture, that lab scope capture that Chad shared with us was the missing current, the missing pulses from the injectors. We saw them I'd say turn off or not come back on when they should have. And the yellow trace, the crankshaft position sensor trace, did not vanish. It was there and it was at full amplitude. It did what it was supposed to do. But zooming in with that lab scope, the power of a lab scope, zooming in and seeing the variations in we'll call pulse width is what really caught Chad's eye. And that was a big takeaway. So, Chad, again, buddy, thank you so much for taking the time to spend with me here on this because there's so many people that look up to you and your processes that you portray in your channel, Practical Mechanic. I think it's brilliant. I really appreciate everything you do, the hard work, and I'm honored to have you on Wrench Tales with us. I only wish I had a sticker and an autograph from you.
I'll see you sometime.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
And
I'm glad you could have me on here to share, this case study because ultimately I don't want somebody else to go down the long road that I went down. I want them to see this, and even if they don't remember all the information, it's stuck in the back of their head somewhere, and they're like, I remember this, and it was something to do with the crank sensor. And that's all they have to
love it.
remember. And they could
Brilliant.
go in with their scope. Not every scope is going to be as capable to differentiate, the small differences in that pulse width, but most of them
Mhm.
out there, you'd be able to see it visually and see like that doesn't look right. I need to pursue that and inspect it.
You're a true teacher, my friend. You got a gift. And you know what I appreciate most about everything you shared with us, Chad, is I've known you several years. Are we great friends? No, it's because we don't spend a lot of time together, but I see you all over the place around the country. And every time I see you, I'm like, what a class act. That guy's such a nice, approachable guy. And with the amount of publicity you have with your YouTube channel, um, I would understand you had a chip on your shoulder, but you don't. If I didn't know who you were, I'd have never known by the way you and I met that you were who you were. I hope that makes sense. And please take that as a compliment because I appreciate how humble you are, my friend.
Yeah,
Um,
we're all capable of making mistakes, and I make them with the best of us.
well stated, brother. Chad, thanks again for joining us. Everybody, thanks for watching this episode of Wrench Tales. We really appreciate you following along. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, like, subscribe, and share with all your friends on Facebook and all your social channels. And we appreciate you watching, your support. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Chad.
Yeah, see ya.